I guess I've run a few marathons in my time. I never kept count, but I've certainly run enough to make plenty of errors. I remember back in the 90s coming across these things called gels that you used instead of just drinking fluids all the time. Wow. Suddenly I found I was bonking a lot less on long runs and in the marathon. I remember stuffing down a huge bowl of pasta the night before one marathon and feeling slow and bloated at the race the next day. I've run marathons in the sun without a hat and then had heat stroke at the end. Liz is laughing because she's seen me with heat stroke. It's not a pretty sight. I've also run in really, really old shoes, so that they're well worn in and your feet will be nice and comfortable. And then wondered why my feet felt really dead when I get into the last few miles of a race. I've also skimped on some specific training because I was in the middle of soccer season. And then wondered why I was a dead man walking at 35K mark in the marathon. So I then compensated by doing a 3-hour run every week in training. And then wondered why I was a dead man walking at the 35K mark in the marathon. Yep, I've done all of these things. But you don't have to do all of these things. All you have to do is read today's book. Hi, and welcome to the Running Book Reviews podcast, where we review books written for runners, about runners, and by runners to help you decide if you'd like to read the book for yourself. We also hope that listening to us chat about running can help keep you motivated about your own running, or maybe inspire you to try something new. Oh, let me take a second here just to remind you about our Buy Me a Coffee page. You can get a lot of extras and outtakes by listing yourself as a supporter, and you'll get an automatic email every time we post something new on there. Just go to Buy Me a Coffee and search for Running Book Reviews. My name's Alan, and with my co-host Liz, we're going to talk with author Sam Murphy about her book, Run Your Best Marathon.
Run Your Best Marathon is a guide to training and racing the marathon distance. The marathon has many challenges if you're trying to run at your full potential. You need to run at a hard effort while managing fuel stores and trying to stay focused for several hours. This book uses science as a base for concrete tips and recommendations for approaching everything from training to race day execution and many other topics in between. The book has 19 chapters, which are divided into 6 sections. Section 1 is on training, then it's followed by the marathon programs, the practicalities, body maintenance, on your marks, and nutrition and hydration. So a little bit about Sam. Sam Murphy has spent her career in journalism and took time off to complete a Bachelor of Science in Sports and Exercise Science. She has been a lifelong advocate for spending time outside and has participated in a variety of endurance sports, including running distances from 5K to marathons, swimming, and triathlon. Sam is an England athletics qualified coach and has been writing the Murphy's Lore column in the UK version of Runner's World magazine. She is also not a first-time book author. Sam has written 4 other books, including 3 more about running and one called The Official British Army Fitness Guide, which sounds really hardcore. So welcome to the podcast, Sam.
Thank you. It's really nice to be here.
So I guess we'll start the way that we usually do. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you decided to write this book.
You mentioned that I've already written some running books before, and one of those was specifically about marathons. I wrote it in 2004, so a really long time ago. And the market was very different then because fewer people were running than are now. And so the marathon itself was a niche. It was a market in itself. But now, of course, we've got so many people running marathons, many of them running purely just to get round or running for charity, and people who have been now running for some time and looking to beat specific time goals with real kind of personal challenges. And so I feel like the marathon market has really changed over that sort of almost 2 decades since I'd written that first book. So initially I looked at the first book and thought, right, we need to update this. And I've started to go through it and make notes. Then I think, oh, no, we can't put that in. That's really changed now. The science on that's really changed. And the nutrition stuff, okay, well, that's changed a little bit. And we need to add this in. And it hasn't really got much about that. And I ended up thinking, actually, we need to do a new book. We can't just update this because there's so much that I want to say that has developed or evolved in running since then. And also my own running journey. You know, I've run a lot more over those 2 decades and coached a lot more and had a lot more experience with a big range of people. So I just felt it was time to do a new book altogether.
Did you have a particular sort of audience, like first-time marathoners, or, you know, done a marathon or a couple of marathons and sort of looking to get better, or advanced marathoners? Was there a sort of target that you were looking at?
Yeah, definitely. I've been coaching groups, not clubs as in the official kind of athletics club system, but running groups for many years. I've had groups all over the place with multi-ability runners, and lots of beginners groups where people have come through from not running at all and doing, you know, their first 5K and then sort of building up from there. And I think that there's, you know, throughout the world, but I certainly notice it in the UK, that there is a real jump that people make from, you know, 1 minute they're doing their first 5K and then they're doing their 10K, and then it's half marathon, it's marathon, all within maybe a year. And I wanted to sort of say to people, you know, I think you'll get a lot more out of the marathon if you wait until you've got a bit more mileage under your belt, and that, you know, until you can do a half marathon quite comfortably and you've done quite a few half marathons, then it's time to start to think about stepping up. And I think people almost whiz through those steps a little bit too quickly, and then they really struggle when they come to the marathon. Because one of the things you'll notice that I said in the book is, you know, you can kind of get away with even a half marathon without too much training, because the body will not go into that fuel deficit, you know, what we call the wall, which we might talk about a little bit later. You're not going to really hit that, or some slower runners might hit that point, but generally you can get away with making mistakes, some of those mistakes you mentioned at the beginning, going off too fast, not fueling properly, not being fully recovered, all of those things. And you'll just about get away with it. But when it comes to the marathon, you just really cannot make those mistakes, because you're already playing, you know, quite a dangerous game with the amount of energy that can be stored in the body. So you really have to kind of get your pacing right. You have to get your preparation right. So I think it's a different beast, and therefore it needs really specific preparation that the person who's embarking on that race is ready for. So let's not get them from doing, you know, 10, 12 miles a week to suddenly jumping onto a marathon program. In 16 weeks' time, they're going to run a marathon. And I've tried to encourage people through this book to always think about where they are. So there's a whole chapter called All About You, which is really about getting the reader to think about their own running, because I think we've got this tendency to think of marathon programs as you know, as a sort of a consumer item. You know, you're in the shop and you're like, yes, I think I'll have the 4:30 today. Or I think, yes, no, I'd like the sub 3. And you just pick that program off the shelf and then you follow it and everything should go to plan. But of course, that's not considering where you are, what your starting point is. You know, what are your strengths and weaknesses as a runner? What are your, you know, your injury tendencies, and how quickly do you recover from training? Are you a high mileage runner? All of those things are going to need to be considered and thrown into the mix when it's coming up with the right program.
I guess what we do is we'll target something based on, you know, we like the sub 3, so we'll choose that. But what we say to ourselves is, actually, what we intend to do on marathon day will be dictated by how the training goes. Depending on what the training tells us, we will then modify maybe our expectations based on some factual data rather than.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that the two most important times for the factual data are at the beginning. So thinking about where you are, looking at different race calculators and times in other distances, previous races, how they'd gone, and what point you ran out of energy, or what point did you start to fall off of your goal, and looking at those things at the beginning, and then setting a realistic goal, challenging but realistic. And then again, as you say, I mean, it's good to review along the way as well, of course, but again, just when you've finished the training and you're just about to start that taper period, to then think, okay, where are we now? What's really going to be realistic now? And not just blindly, it's great to have optimism, but let's make it sort of realistic optimism, and not just go, oh, well, I'll still hope I'll do sub 3, even though everything you've done in training suggests that that's not realistic. Now, I'm not talking about you, Liz, on this when we're talking about this.
No, but I like,
I'm not aiming these comments at you in any way or any shape or form.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't even know if it's realistic really, because like, you look at my fastest is like 3:04.5, and I want to go under 3. So let's say I need like 5 minutes faster, like 5 minutes. It sounds like, oh, it's not a lot, because over the course of a marathon, it's maybe like, I don't know, 7 seconds per kilometer faster. Yeah. So you're like, okay, well, that should be doable, right? With another training cycle, but like sometimes it's not. And that's what I found out in the fall. It's like, well, that's just not how it is. And then I even look at like the time that I did that race. I mean, I did that race, and actually that result was kind of a surprise, because we had done this like multi-day trail event, and we came back, and it was like, maybe we had, I don't remember how many weeks we had before the marathon, but it wasn't a lot of weeks. So all those, those like, those long marathon pace workouts, like I had done very few of them. Like, yes, I had base and I did volume, but like, so I can't say I was really expecting the result that I got. And so this makes the whole marathon process like such a mystery to me. Like, I just
it's
don't
interesting,
understand.
isn't it? You can't just discount that and think, oh, well, that's weird, but I'll do something different. You think, okay, well, what did I get out of that training cycle? Why was it quite comfortable? I'm not saying it was that comfortable, but, why was it achievable to do 3:04 off the back of quite a different sort of training cycle than you might have imagined would be the right one? And maybe that teaches you something about your strengths and weaknesses as a runner. And
I mean,
think,
it was totally unstructured. There was no structure to that training cycle. It was not a 12-week build up and do these like bread and butter like you need to do. Well, you need to keep in touch with your speed a little bit. So like a couple of those 5K workouts just to preserve that. And then you have to do all the long runs, and you have to do all those marathon pace runs. And those marathon pace runs are key. But like,
but maybe you're somebody who, maybe those faster runs take a lot out of you, and you're much more of a sort of, you're much more comfortable with endurance distance. And so maybe you just need fewer of those kind of really harder pace stuff sessions, or you need longer gaps between them just in order to be able to still do those other runs. So there's always clues. It's not being, a detective, and you learn from what you've done, or you learn from looking at a client. If you're, when you're coaching someone and you're like, so that's weird. They responded really well to this, but they didn't respond well to that, or took ages to recover from this. And, you're kind of building up this picture of that individual. And also, I think what's really interesting about training is people's psychology about it. I mean, my husband runs very well, and he's kind of quite happy with repetition. He likes Tuesdays I do this, Thursdays I do that, and Sundays I do a lot, Oh, you're like that. I can't stand that. I'm just like, I need variety, and I don't want to always do, the lactate threshold session on a Thursday. I might be, I don't want to do that. I want to do some short hills, or I want to do, something completely different. So, and I found that really plays out with people who I've coached too, that some people every week they want to know, what's it going to be this week? What session have you invented? And they want sessions to be really creative and different. And other people don't really want that. They're just like, just give me like, 800s or whatever, and just want that kind of that repetition week after week. They feel more comfortable with that. So it's interesting.
Yeah, I guess the thing about those sessions is that like what I find that it gives me, that repetition, is that then you can maybe like start to see a bit of progress. Whereas if the session is always different, like I feel like I don't know what kind of fitness I'm at, because maybe some of those sessions are like not going to be my strengths. Maybe half of them won't be my strengths, and then I won't really know if I'm doing well or not. And if they never repeat themselves, then I'll be like lost. That's probably how your husband feels.
But you won't be lost, Liz, because we'll do the 10K race or something like that, and you'll know from that.
Yeah. Do you guys have park run in Canada?
Not much.
Not really.
No.
It's just a small thing.
Yeah, I think there are
Yeah.
45 park runs in the whole of Canada, and there are like like 500 in the UK.
Yeah. We were at park run this morning, and we still run a little coached group, and we all had targeted this park run today, and we were like, come on, we're going to go, and people are going to get PBs. And then it was just awful weather. It was so muddy on the course, and it was raining the whole way through and stuff. And I think we might have just got a couple amongst the team, but yeah, I think that's I've put park runs or time trials throughout the marathon program, so there is that sense that you can come back to a distance and repeat it and use the same route or the same course, because it is important to be able to check in and sort of see how you're doing. And I can imagine that doing the same sessions over again does build confidence when you're getting progress, but runners can also be quite obsessive, I think. And so there can be that thing that, you do the session and you get these particular split times, and then the next week they've done a really hard long run, maybe with some marathon pace, and then they might do the reps the next week, and they're like, oh my reps weren't as quick this week. And it's like, yeah, well, that's probably because you did that. But even though the evidence would give plenty of reasons why that didn't go as well, and it's all part of the big training journey, people can get quite fixated on the fact that they didn't manage to do it as quickly, and they start to then think, I'm not getting fitter, and maybe throwing in extra sessions and that sort of thing. So that's why it's so important to know your running personality, I think, or if you're working with others, to know their running personality and try and sort of work with that.
It's a fantastic little puzzle, really, the marathon, I think, in that it's right on the edge of your physiological limits in some, your glycogen stores and all of those kind of things. And a lot of that is personal for whoever you are and what your makeup is and what your training history is and what you like and what you don't like. And so it's like a Rubik's Cube. You've got to kind of turn all the pieces. And even then you might get a shitty weather day. So the whole thing might be a mess. So that could, hurt you or help you, depending, which is what makes it all kind of fascinating. And the outcome's never certain. And that's why we want to pour over a book like yours, I think, because we want to go, okay, well, maybe there's a little piece there that I haven't thought about.
Maybe there's a secret.
We all want that magic bullet, don't we? The secret.
There's mostly not, but maybe there's an ingredient that you could put in which will make the cake taste nicer.
And maybe the ingredient isn't the same for everybody. Maybe everybody's got a different secret ingredient, or maybe there are different types of ingredients. But I think one of the chapters that I thought, which I didn't really have in the book that I did in 2004, was the mental marathon. So that section was all about training the brain. And I think the phrase that sort of comes out of it for me that's so important is getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, because that is so much part of marathon running. And that's both in the sense of the physiological side of it, as you just said, that you're pushing at the real boundaries of that sort of human limit, trying to push at your personal top speed, but over a prolonged duration. but also the discomforts of, you know, your stomach doesn't like running 26.2 miles much, does it? And
No.
you might have like blisters or chafing, or, you know, so there's some kind of bodily discomforts that you have to put up with as well. And I think just kind of getting okay with that, you know, just accepting that that's sort of part of it, and learning to sort of be comfortable with being uncomfortable is just such a good thing to have in mind. And that's really like where those sessions come from. Things like, you know, starting out at an easy long run pace, and then, you know, the last 8 miles you've got to suddenly find your marathon pace and things like that. You know, that it really is trying to push you to withstand the discomfort of doing that, but without making you so exhausted through running the whole thing at marathon pace that you're then going to have 4 or 5 days off of good quality training in order to recover from that fully.
So I've always kind of found that in training, I guess I have like a bit of less tolerance for that whole grind. Like there's so many times where you know, like training didn't go very well, and then I would come to race day, whatever the distance is. Like sometimes it's like it's a 5K or 10K, and somehow I managed to put it together in the race. But and this has been like my whole racing career. Like this has always been the case, and I have no idea why. It's like in it's I either overperform in races or I underperform in training. But it's not that the training feels hard. It definitely feels hard. And oftentimes in training, it's just, you know, for 5K race, which is like the park run, you in 5K training, it's very easy. You break up the 5K and you run intervals at your 5K pace. So you actually do run the whole 5K in training, which you don't do with the marathon. So the marathon has that extra level. But like even in the 5K, you know, I would be breaking up the 5K into 8. Like if it was 400s, that was okay. When it starts to get to those like 800-meter 1K repeats, we used to have this workout with the old club I was with, and it was 5 times 1K at 5K pace. And then you had like, I don't remember what the rest was. It was like 2 minutes or 2.5 minutes, something like that in between. That was like the hardest training for me for the whole season. I felt like I just barely scraped through, and I would finish that workout feeling like, oh my God, how am I going to do this in the race with no break? And
and then you would.
And then I would. That workout would completely predict what I was going to do in the 5K. And I just like, it's so strange. Like, any theories on that?
Well, I think we've got a different, I mean, there are differences. I mean, I think I'm struggling more to explain it in terms of a 5K, but definitely with a marathon, I think there are lots of reasons. You know, a lot of the long runs and training sessions we're doing, marathon training, we're doing them all pretty fatigued. You know, we're semi-fatigued all the time just because of the volume of training. And so, you know, you're never really kind of performing at your absolute. So when you have your taper and you start to recover from all that effort, you know, you're going into the race with a lot more energy and a lot more sort of, you know, verve. And also anything that you've been like carrying could be niggles in terms of just sort of small little injuries, or even things like blisters and just soreness, general kind of muscle soreness. All of that has a chance to fade. And then you've got the adrenaline of performing a race. You don't have to carry anything. You don't have to carry your own like water pack or,
that's true.
You know, so you've got all these advantages. You've got the crowd supporting you, and you've got that pressure that you put on yourself. So I think when people say, oh my God, I'm never going to be able to, you know, do this in racing, that you know, I couldn't even do it in training. And it's like, it doesn't work like that. You definitely can pull out things in racing that you cannot pull out in training. For the 5K, there are some people, I mean, I would say I'm also similar in that I'm a good racer. I'm good at racing. You know, I can really push myself, and people who on paper should be fitter than me, and in training at group each week, you know, they're always ahead of me. And yet I can still beat some of those people in a race because they're just not as good at racing. They're not as good. They either go off way too fast and then they struggle, or they just haven't yet got to the stage where they can push themselves that hard. And I always remember this experience I had once when early days when I'd met my husband. And so we'd met on this training holiday. And so we were both runners, and we were going to do this 5K race. And then he wasn't very well. So he said, well, look, I'll just run with you. I'll pace you. So we ran around this race, and my breathing was just getting more and more, out ragged and out of control. And I was, where you start to get quite high pitched when you're sort of, and I sort of started to kind of back off a bit. And I was like, oh, that's not right. There's not something, something wrong with my breathing. And he was going, no, there's not. That's just normal. That's fine. You're fine. Just keep pushing.
That's how you're racing. That's what racing's all about.
Getting a prize. And it was just such a revelation to me, because I just didn't really realize that I was able to push myself that hard. And I had thought that I was already at as hard as I could push, but he proved that it was fine. And yes, this is how hard you work. This is and ever since then, I got lots of breakthroughs after that, because I was confident that I could push myself that bit harder. So I think pain tolerance is part of it. The sort of more stark way of talking about getting comfortable with being uncomfortable is really about pain tolerance. And there are studies, that show that people who are very athletic have got greater pain tolerance, and they, get them to put their hand into a bucket of ice water and see how long they can hold it in the water, or somewhere they use one of those a tourniquet and cut the blood supply off. Really quite cruel experiments. Yeah. And they
Pretty
find
painful.
that people who are routinely, in endurance sports can perform better in those tests, because they're just kind of quite used to pain and discomfort.
One of the things that we've set ourselves up for, in fact, in a trial marathon that we've got planned for May, leading on to our sub-3 attempt at the end of the year, is to run the marathon at our sort of current level of fitness, which is probably a little slower, but to maybe make an engagement with ourselves to run the last 4 kilometers of the marathon at our target race pace. So to go a little slower through the marathon, but when you get to the last 4 kilometers, click it into sub 3 hour pace and try to deliver it just the last 4 kilometers, which is part of the getting comfortable with the discomfort, and proving to yourself that it can be done. When you think you're tapped out, okay, no, we shouldn't be, and let's go. And try to sort of prove that to ourselves and take the mental barrier off for race day.
Yeah. I'm sure at some point in your podcast, I'm not sure of your listings, but have you reviewed the book, the Murakami book, what I talk about when I talk about
running? We both
not
have the
yet.
book, but we haven't done it yet.
No. Well, he talks about the difference between suffering and pain. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. And one of our running clubs, we had that on the back of our T-shirts, because I just thought that was such a, you choose, yes, it's going to be uncomfortable, but if it's helping you achieve something that really means a lot to you, and it's your goal and you're working towards that, then that isn't suffering. It might be pain, but it's a positive thing, because you're pushing towards something that means something to you. It's got purpose and it's got value. And so to define that as suffering isn't right. It's not suffering. And I think that just that little mindset kind of tweak is really powerful. And so I think I've talked about that in the book too, because I think that sometimes it's not really physical fitness that stops us achieving our goals. It is just that those things of, if you do manage, you do hit the wall, or you do have a bad patch in the race, that you just go into a bit of a negative spiral. Oh, right, that's it. Oh, I knew that would happen. Oh, I'm not going to make it now. And that kind of thing. And I think being able to just pull yourself back out. And, advise people in the book to expect a bad patch, because it's a long way, it's a long time. And, it's quite possible or even likely that you will go through a period of time during a marathon where you're not going to feel great. And you might start to sort of think, oh, I'm not feeling too good. And I'd say, okay, think about when you last ate something, think about when you last drank, think about your form, your shoulders up here by your ears and you're really tense and you're slamming your feet into the ground, just think about those things. And then, just try and focus externally, look at somebody in the crowd, make eye contact, try and, focus on the back of the person in front of you, all of those things to just take your mind off of that internal suffering, because often, we don't do that. And we just start to go, oh, well, I told you were never going to do it. And, you go into that really negative self-talk and find yourself spiraling and pretty much giving up on your goal. And so I think the mental marathon chapter could be a key one for people who just don't quite know why they're not getting, that it seems in training they should be able to do it, but they're not quite kind of pulling it out the bag on the day.
And sometimes it's it starts even before the day, like, because you talk about the taper and you talk about, like, when you're in taper mode, like, you get all the, the paranoia. Where you're just like, you start to get a little achy and then you second guess everything. And you think like, oh, that you're not really prepared for this marathon thing. And that's even before you've even gotten to the starting line. And you actually you talk about one thing called neuro-linguistic programming as a way of, kind of preparing yourself more for race day. And you have this thing called circle of excellence, which I found a kind of like something that I think I'm going to try for the next marathon. Do you want to describe that?
Yeah, sure. It's a really nice technique because it's quite it's very simple. You don't need anything with you. So the idea with the circle of excellence is that you think about the things that you're going to need to do your race. So you might think, well, I need to be able to, put up with some discomfort, and I need to have some self-belief, some confidence. I might, you might need to overcome nerves or anything that you feel are the qualities that you're going to need to get you through your race. And then you kind of scan back over your memories and think, when did I show that I had that? There's going to be a time when you really sort of pushed, you had to maybe speak in public that you really didn't want to do and you were nervous, but you managed to overcome that. And really sort of think about, yeah, I did do that. I was really scared, but I managed to overcome that. And so you think, okay, so I have got that attribute. And you put that into your imaginary circle. So you might draw a circle. We actually did a marathon workshop where we had chalk and we actually drew circles on the ground. And then you'd put that in there. And then you think about a time where you withstood a lot of discomfort and pain. I'm sure lots of women will think of childbirth. Thinking of different times where you have actually experienced that and how you overcame it, and then putting each of those qualities into this imaginary circle. Then you step into the circle and you let it all permeate through into you, and then you just step out and you pick it up, your imaginary circle, and you put it away, and then you can step into it when you get to the start line. You just visualize yourself putting it down, you step into that circle, and all that brilliance that you own, that you've already shown that you have on previous occasions, all comes back out to be ready for you to take into your race.
That's great. And then the other thing that you mentioned, which is something that actually I had a friend tell me that she did during one of her marathons, is you mentioned dedicating a kilometer or whatever, a portion of your race to a person that you care about. So in some way, or you dedicate it to something. So I know that in the case of my friend who had told me about it before I read it in the book, she dedicated the last 12 kilometers to 12 different people, because she said, like, I can run the first 30 kilometers. It's the last 12 that are going to be difficult. So
that's great.
She picked 12 people, and like, I think she had written the names on her.
Well, you'd have to, otherwise you'd forget, wouldn't you?
I would forget.
Your brain dead by the end.
I don't know if if it was me, I would have written them down. I think she mentioned she wrote them on her arm or something. But yeah, she said she had like, so for the last, when she hit 30 kilometers, so for the next kilometer, she thought about person.
I think, yeah. So you might, if you were doing in kilometers, you might struggle to come up with 42 people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you had mentioned to do it in miles, dedicate a mile.
Yeah. I did it once when I did a 12-hour cycle time trial. And so I had 12 hours to ride as far as I could. And I did 12 people as well. But by the end, I'd run out of people. So I did the dog. All the things I was grateful about the dog and my happiest memories with the dog, just kind of slightly scraping the barrel. But, I'd done the extended family already. So
I think those things can be a little hard. I mean, I think if you need them for a distraction, that's good, but they take up quite a lot of your mind space. And I think I preferred some of your other ones, like, I mean, if they work, fine. But I preferred some of your other ones, like Smile. I mean, you get all serious and then you get, as you say, shoulders hunched up around your ears and your permanent scowl on your face. Like, relax, smile and wave.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
That's
Kipchoge he's a real smiler. And people, when he was doing the first time when he did the 2-hour attempt and didn't quite make it, people were saying, oh, because this was before anyone had asked him about it. And people were saying, look, he's not even struggling. He's smiling. He's not even trying, And then people asked him about it afterwards. And he said, no, if I'm smiling, then it's really hard. And I'm deliberately smiling to try and tell my body that everything's okay and to relax and kind of get away from that sort of tenseness and that fear. And then subsequently, a study was done at a university in the UK, which found that your running economy actually improves when you smile. I mean, it actually does have a physical biomechanical effect, which is really remarkable, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. And it sure beats I think, like, in the past, it was always, when you ran, you had to run with like strong emotions like anger. It seemed like people would use those kinds of things as a way to gain like a competitive edge. So I'm actually quite happy that like it's changed a little bit, because I always had a hard time with those other things. Trying to be angry during a race just seems like very distracting for me.
Definitely. And then that would maybe encourage you to sort of, that mindset is about, you're trying to beat everyone else, aren't you? You're angry and you're going to try and sort of
show them.
Yeah. And then that's taking the focus off you and your performance, because you're trying to view your performance in the context of other people's, which is really difficult. And it's never a good idea, because you can't control what they're going to do. You can only control what you're going to do.
Yeah, exactly. So I think maybe we can rewind a little bit, because there was something interesting in your first chapter where you kind of, you just sort of introduce the marathon, and you talk about the fastest growing age group of marathon participants between 2014 and 2017 apparently was the 90 to 99-year-old age group. That's first of all amazing, but also, like, why? How did that happen? Any hypothesis? You might not know, but maybe.
I don't have any kind of inside information on those stats, but I just thought that was really worth pulling out, because I guess as more older people have been participating and been seen to be participating, because it has been kind of drawn out a little bit more in the media, I think, the fact that there are these octogenarians doing amazing times in marathons and performing. I suppose that's given other people the confidence to give it a go as well. I remember there was a great woman, I've forgotten her name now. I think she was a Scottish woman, and she had taken up running in her like late 60s, and she was racing till her late 80s and was running, decent times. And she was always the oldest person in the London Marathon. And one year she said, this is going to be my last one. And so they said, oh yeah, do you feel like you've had enough now? You need to sort of give it a rest. And she was like, no, I've got lots of other things I want to try next. It's just like, yes,
I'm giving it up and going
brilliant.
to Ironman triathlon
She's
next.
probably going to do triathlon next or something. I just thought that was so fantastic to just, it wasn't that she was going to try and,
Rest.
quieten down and rest.
Mhm.
Yeah, she
No,
just
no,
had
it was-
so many other things to try. And it's like, that's such a great example to set, isn't it?
One of the things in your training that comes up, which I was sort of pleased to see because of some of the books we've read, was RPE, or relative perceived effort, and the fact that there's all this heart rate monitoring and stuff, but actually if you just learn to think about, well, how hard do I feel that I'm working, there's actually a lot of value in that sensing of that perceived effort in terms of being able to dictate your training paces and those kind of things. We came across this when we read On Pace by Matt Fitzgerald, where he does a whole series of training programs based entirely on RPE, relative perceived effort. So not, am I running at 6-minute pace, but am I running at what I feel like is a 5 out of 10 pace? I'm just saying that for our listeners, really, so that they know what I'm talking about with respect to RPE, relative perceived effort. But most people are still terrible at pacing.
And even knowing what the RPE feels like.
Yeah, that's true. And I mean, I think,
Yeah. What advice have you got for us for pacing?
well, I think it's really important to try to improve your sense of pacing, and to not rely on your watch and your phone and other gadgets to tell you what your pacing is, because they're just not that reliable. And I think some of the data that you're given, I mean, I don't mean that the minutes per K or the minutes per mile. I mean, that probably is it's fairly accurate. I mean, there are some differences between different qualities of model and brand. And
I have an example. I know that I have an athlete that I coach, and she's gotten herself a treadmill because sometimes in the winter it just was not possible for her to go run outside because she would also have her parent duties. And she when she started running workouts on her treadmill, she would be like, I don't get it because the treadmill says this and the watch says that, like in terms of her pacing. And so I told her, well, if you're on the treadmill, ignore what your watch says and just go by your treadmill. But even that, it's like, it might not be accurate, because it could just be that your treadmill hasn't been calibrated because it was, it was a used one. So, so I guess like how do you like get people to stop stop worrying so much about what their pace was, maybe like get more in tune with knowing that they're running hard enough for whatever the stimulus is supposed to be?
Yeah, I mean, I think with you talked about the RPE and say a 5 out of 10, or using a number out of 10. We also use a lot of kind of descriptions of what different paces feel like. I did include a table of these descriptions in the appendix of the book. So we have with the groups that we coach, we have this system of like level 1 means you could do it all day. If somebody said run and you might not be able to stop for 5 hours, what pace would you run? And then we've got level 2, which is kind of the pace you would probably instinctively run at, if you just were going out for a run. So it's not easy, but it's steady. You can hold a conversation, but you're going to get a bit breathless doing so. And then level 3 is pushing up to kind of just the edge of your comfort zone. So just going into that kind of like lactate threshold area. So it's a controlled discomfort kind of feeling, but you still would be able to keep it going for sort of 45 minutes or an hour, but it is going to feel pretty hard. And then level 4 is like 1 or 2 words only, breathing really hard, tough pace, which is generally going to be 5K plus, sort of more like 3K effort. And then level 5, which is sprints, which would obviously be really small doses. It might be hill sprints or just really short efforts. And so because we work with a multi-ability group, it works really well because one person's level 3 range is very different from another's, but they're still working at their own version of that level. And we might do something like 4 lots of 8 minutes at that pace with a recovery. And so some people are going to get a lot further in the 8 minutes, but it doesn't matter because they're all in a contained kind of stretch of road or a park or whatever. And everyone's working at their pace. And also individually, that can vary too. You know, if you've had a really hard day at work and then you come to a training session in the evening, your level 3 might be on your watch, might be 15, 20 seconds different than it normally is per mile. But you're still running at the correct effort level. So I think having that kind of idea of how should it feel to be running at a steady pace or an easy pace. You know, I find most people's easy pace just isn't easy enough. It's always just a little bit above easy. And I really try to encourage people to make their easy runs feel like almost effortless, you know, just really, really easy. I really like that idea of polarizing your training and having, let's make easy runs easy and hard runs hard, rather than everything kind of bunching up into the middle and being not that different, you know, where you've got people who say, oh, I can only run one pace. Whether it's a 5K or a half marathon, there's like barely any difference between their pace because they're just kind of in that middle zone all the time. So there's a couple of good sessions that are worth using if you're struggling with pacing. So one is we call winders. So you're using a loop, and it depends what pace you need to practice on. So it could be a track, I guess, and you run that lap and then you time it, and then the next one's got to be like just a little bit faster, and the next one's got to be just a little bit faster again. And so you have to get faster on each lap, whereas most people's tendency, of course, is to go off really fast and then get slower on each lap. So we sometimes do that with about a kilometer loop. So we wouldn't really be we don't really work on the track because of the sort of groups that we're running. But yeah, so it could be a loop of the park and then you get back.
How many loops?
When we do the kilometer one, we'll have people doing between probably 4 to 5, depending on how long it takes them to do it.
Okay.
So that's quite a nice one. And then also just doing an out and back. So you run out for, say, 13 minutes, kind of tempo pace, turn, and you've got to get back in 12 and a half, or maybe a little bit. So that's just that idea that you've got to try and get back quicker, rather than you going out and you're feeling good, but then on the way back, you know, it all starts to go a bit wrong. And then you really start to get that internal sense of pacing, and you learn it's a very visual demonstration of whether your pacing's really out or whether you're quite good or you need to work on it a little bit. So
it's just like our marathon. You run out in 1 hour 30 and you run back in 1 hour 29 and a half.
Hopefully.
Is it an out and back course?
We had one.
We did have one.
That was a
double
2
out and
loop.
back.
It was 2 loops. Yeah, it was a double out and back. So you went out and back. That was like one. It was half of the marathon. You went through the finish line and everything, and then you had to do it again. But it was fantastic because you knew what you were getting yourself into.
You knew what to expect. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
The one that we're doing in the spring, that one is 2. If it doesn't change, it's supposed to be 2 loops of the half. So that'll be good.
That's another thing, that people's psychology really differs, you know, in terms of that kind of race. There's a race in the UK where you run like 26 laps of a cycle, and in a sort of cycle stadium, like a cycle track thing, that's a mile, and you run 26 times around there. And some people are like, oh, it's brilliant. You can have all your friends and family down, and they can hand you stuff and all that. Other people are like, oh, my worst nightmare to have to run around in circles 26 miles. So, you know, the psychology is quite interesting. And some people like to, you know, fly abroad and go somewhere, you know, that they really want to visit and tie the race with that. To me, that's just a nightmare, because I hate hassle on race morning. So I don't want to have to try and find, you know, get the bus and get to the start and not know where I'm going and all that. You know, I grew up about a mile from the start line of the London Marathon. So that was just brilliant. And, you know, even
you actually have no reason to want to go anywhere else, because everybody wants to come there.
Yeah, once I'd grown up, I could always go and stay at my mum's the night before and just walk down to the start, and it was so easy. So I don't like the idea of doing races where you've got to get a shuttle bus at 5 a.m, and I kind of like a nice peaceful race morning. So
maybe that's going to be the secret to my sub 3, Alan. We need to find one of those races where it's like a mile loop and you have to do it 26 times. I think I would do well in one of those.
Okay, 2024.
yeah, come to the UK.
I notice your marathon programs in the book, they occur sort of in the middle or quite near the start, in fact.
Yeah.
But also that they're all 20 weeks. There's all kinds of different programs for different levels and beginners and experienced people and people with lots of time available and not so much time available, but they're all 20 weeks. Do you want to explain to us your reason around 20 weeks?
I think, partly because I've included the taper within the program. So sometimes they don't do that. So then they look shorter than they are in books and magazines sometimes, because they just kind of take you up to the last long run. But I think my main reason is because I really feel that there's often too steep a climb from week 1 of a program to what you might call like the peak training week before the taper starts. And so you've got somebody who maybe they've never run a marathon, and they're coming to it and they haven't run more than 10 miles before, and then they're doing a 12-week program or a 14-week program, and in that time they've got to, each week that they do a long run is going to be the longest run they've ever done. Every time, it's just kind of going up and up and up, because it has to, because there just isn't that duration available to take very many weeks off, or to drop the distance down. And so this idea that you're just building and building and building, and then you get to this peak and you do the longest run you've ever done, and then 3 weeks later you do the longest run that you've ever done, but it's the marathon, and it just doesn't really make sense when you think about it. And so what I've tried to do with the programs is get people to their peak long run distance earlier in the program. So it's not the last long run you do is not your longest run. You get to that distance, and then you've got time to back off and do a couple of shorter runs, maybe do a race, and then you'll come back up to that longer distance again. And in the less beginnery programs that are in the book, you'll come and do that again as well. So you're kind of coming back to that really longest run, but you're not just kind of doing it in consecutive weeks that are, doing 18 and then 19 and then 20. You actually have got more time between those. And I think that's borne out probably of people getting injured through those peak weeks, experiencing that as coaching people and seeing that time where everything's going well, and then they get to that, those weeks where it's just, every long run is just really hard, and finding that they're getting injured, or that they just aren't managing to recover in time from those peak long runs and actually just don't feel good when it comes to race day. And I think it takes a bit of confidence, I think, to do a little bit less. I think we can even, the science of it, and, I've studied the physiology of it, but, even so people kind of go, oh, what if I have a week off, won't I lose all my fitness? If you do 20 miles and then you don't do 20 miles the next week, that your fitness for that 20 miles is going to go. And it just doesn't happen that quickly, particularly when you're still giving your body plenty of stimuli for improving fitness. It's not that you're suddenly doing nothing for a week.
Except if you get injured, then you will suddenly do nothing for a week.
Well, yeah, absolutely. So it is a lengthier process to do a 20-week program, but it isn't just doing more. It's not just here's an extra sort of 4 weeks and you just do more training. It's actually just allowing there to be a bit more space in that program for people so that your journey is kind of like this rather than like this when you're trying to get to that peak time. And then you get to the peak time, but then you've got a little bit of up and down. So you can keep revisiting that peak, and you've still got plenty of time to recover before race day.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Especially, getting to do, so you get to do that peak week more than once, but at this, not 2 weeks in a row. Which
Yeah.
which ends up being hard. And sometimes, like, you're tired from the 30K you did last week, and your 30K feels terrible, and then you'll be like, why, I'm never going to be able to run 42 kilometers on the day of the race, because like 30
Yeah.
just feels so awful. Yeah, it sounds like it will feel less awful this way if you have a few weeks in between that are like different.
Yeah.
And since we're on the topic of training, in chapter 5, you mention an important thing that we don't usually see in books, and that is about being visible when running in the dark. So you mentioned that it's better to wear reflective things on moving parts of the body. So maybe you want to, let's just highlight the whole aspect of safety, because we all run in the dark, I think, at some point in the year. So, I mean, we're kind of getting out of that right now because spring's coming and the time changed. So now our workouts are not in the dark, but they were for a few months. So why does it make a difference to wear reflective things on?
The reflective stuff, because it's moving. So if a driver is coming towards you, they might sort of see like a light, that if you have like a head torch or a light, it's sometimes quite difficult to see what it is. It's just like, oh, there's something there, so that it'll make them alert. But when it's actually a moving part, it makes it more obvious that you are a person and that you are a runner. And so, yeah, they have these two different phrases. One's something like, I think one's called perception distance and one's called recognition distance. So it's like there's a certain number of meters away. And also because the colors, using like bright colors, fluoro colors like yellow or bright pink and orange, they're really good, but they're kind of better for daytime visibility. And really at night, reflective visibility is kind of the more important thing. So there'll be a distance where the driver will go, oh, there's something there. But it might be, a badger or an animal crossing the road.
Yeah.
It
might just be the reflection.
It could even just be a pole,
moose.
a pole. Yeah, moose. Yeah,
a bear.
Probably not in the UK. A moose would be quite exciting if it was, but yeah. So then there's
wild pony.
There's the distance that's shorter, which is the one where they go, okay, that's actually a person. So the more you can make it clear that you're a person, and having bits of reflectivity on things like, your feet, back of your heels, or back of your legs or your elbows, or that's really advisable for safety running in the dark.
That makes a lot more sense now, because I always thought that like reflective items on shoes was a little bit of a lost cause because they were so small, and it's like, who's going to look at your feet? But now that makes a lot more sense. Do you want to add anything else about like staying safe outside? Just because we haven't really talked about safety on the podcast, and it's important. Like, we're just coming out of running in the winter where it's dark all the time. So we all kind of know about trying to stay safe on roads where you're trying to share with cars because there's no sidewalks, and or the sidewalks haven't been plowed and full of snow, and the roads tend to be smaller in the winter as well, for the same reason, because the snow doesn't plow the whole street. They kind of plow as wide as the plow.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, yeah. Not problems we have, but yeah, where I live is quite a rural area, so I'm very familiar with the whole thing of going and not having pavements as sidewalks, or we call them pavements, but yeah, not having, you are running in the road with the drivers, and yeah, so the bright colors, and I always try and make eye contact with the driver, and just to make sure that they've seen you. But there's a sort of an old cliche but a very good one that say, be seen, but never assume that you have been. So, you're wearing the bright colors, you're visible, you're there, but don't assume that just because you've done that they've noticed you, because, they should notice you, but if they haven't, then, you're the one who's going to suffer. So you're the one who's going to need to be ready to kind of like jump out the way or whatever. So
it's not always possible, but I think one of the best safety things that probably goes by the wayside is run with a group if you can. It occurs much less often that some car has an accident with 15 runners that were all running together. It tends to be, solitary people.
That's true. That's interesting, because as someone who sort of runs with groups, or takes groups on runs, I think that you're right. The car or the vehicle has to give you a wider berth because there's lots of you. But I also notice that people sometimes, when they're running in a group, absolve themselves of any sense of responsibility.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, well, I'm with a group, so they'll just kind of, if somebody near them's crossing the road, they'll just go with them rather than actually look to see that it's clear to cross. And so you do sometimes have that. I think it's a psychological phenomenon called social loafing. where you just kind of in a group, so you just assume that other people will take the responsibility for whatever a decision or
social loafing. That's good.
I know, I've always liked that phrase.
I love talking with English people. You learn all sorts of new language. It slipped by earlier, but I recognized a new terminology: less beginnery. You said, "Oh, if you're less beginnery."
I have to say,
that's
though,
rather a good term.
I'm just gonna say that, even that you explain this social loafing, but I can tell you that sometimes I'm running with the group and I'll be like, guys, don't cross, and they all cross the street. Because I see, there's cars and stuff. So I figure, because sometimes we're a group of 15, we'll let them go because there's 2 cars, and then we can spread ourselves all over the road afterwards.
Yeah.
But, so I'm like, don't go. And everybody just goes, and you're like, oh no.
Yeah, they're all just talking, aren't they? They're all talking and they're not paying attention. You feel like a school teacher sometimes, don't you, when you're
sometimes
out with a group,
I feel like I've got to come to the defense of the group, because Liz is like an old grandma. Look, there's some lights down there. We should go down there and cross at the lights. Oh, grandma, do we have to?
Okay, but
sounds more like mother hen than grandma, I think.
Well, yeah.
But there are times, because I figure if we're doing an easy run, it doesn't matter if we have to stop for 5 seconds to let the car go by. If we're doing a workout, for sure, you don't want to break your tempo pace because there's a stop sign that, then that's going to kind of ruin your workout. But I mean, obviously you should definitely stop if you don't think the car is going to stop. But so I figure you kind of pick your battles. And I just think if we're on an easy run and we're chatting, there is just no reason for us to also take up all these other people's times. We're actually maybe trying to get somewhere important.
Okay, be safe.
Be safe. Anyway,
let me change the subject. Let me try and while you're here, to try and get you onto the subject of running form. It seems to me that not long ago in the past, I was reading books which all said, oh, don't try to change your running form. It's your natural form and you shouldn't. And increasingly now, I think more and more we're seeing, well, actually, if you want to be a different runner, i.e. better than you were before, you should try to run a bit more efficiently. And there are things you can do to improve your form. Be careful about how you do it, but do it. One, do you agree with that? And two, what should we do with our running form to try to be better, not get injured at the same time?
Yeah, it's a big question, and it was something I did think a lot about when I was doing this book, because I've done a book in the past which is called Running Well, and it is actually all about running form, really, and strength and flexibility and that kind of thing. But it is a lot about running form. But the reason I haven't got a lot about form in here, I mean, there is some, because I couldn't just leave it out altogether, but I tend to think that if you're training for a marathon, you're already taking on a big commitment, and you're already going to have your work cut out for you, I guess, is one way of putting it. And so to then think, oh, I think I'll change my running form as well at the same time it's not the best timing, because it takes a lot of input. It takes a lot of time and effort to change your form. And so it just seems like it's not the best time while you're trying to run your best marathon, you know, to actually be making those changes at the same time. But that said, I think that some of the stuff that came out of that whole, you know, spotlight on running form, which was really inspired by Born to Run and you know, the barefoot running movement. I think a lot of that emphasis on form and you know, where your feet are landing underneath you, what part of the foot's landing, and all of that stuff, higher cadence, all of that really kind of came out of the barefoot running movement. And you know, I look fondly on that time, and still, you know, still wear incredibly minimal shoes, and think that the best shoe advice is to wear as little shoe as possible. But that will vary from person to person, and I would never say, you know, oh yeah, you should wear these shoes that I wear because they're great. You know, it's like one person's version of a minimal shoe is going to be completely different from somebody else's. But I think some of the hangovers of the shoe kind of revolution are foot shaped shoes, you know, not shoes that are shaped narrow toe box and you just squeeze your foot into it. You know, why aren't more shoes designed in a shape of a real foot? And one test people can do is to just take the inner sole out of your running shoe and then just stand on it with a bare foot and see if there's a difference between the shape of your foot and the shape of that inner. And in many, many, many cases, you're going to find there is. And there are a few brands now who are making more foot-shaped shoes, thank goodness. And I would always be going for those. And I want to be able to feel what's under my feet. I want to be able to sense the ground. So I want to be quite low down onto the ground. I don't want to be on a big platform, a big foamy cushion. You know, I just want to be able to feel that, and I want the shoe to flex with my foot. I don't want my foot to be flexed by the shoe. You know, I want my foot to be able to behave in a normal way. And I think that's really where form starts. You know, we're building sort of from the ground up. So I think that's a really important thing to consider, what you've got on your feet. And there's definitely, I think, in terms of injury prevention or the risk of injury from changing your form, which is often talked about, I think really that having pored over the science a lot in this area, it's not that running in a particular way, say the classic kind of running 4-foot strike and high cadence, you know, which is what's mostly promoted these days. It's not that creates less injuries, it just creates different injuries. So that tends to be injuries to the calves and the plantar fascia and the Achilles, whereas a heel strike, you know, a heavy heel strike with quite a straight leg's more associated with front of the body injuries, so knee problems and shin splints and that kind of thing, maybe IT band syndrome. So changing one to the other, if you had a really stubborn Achilles problem, then, you know, changing to be more of a 4-foot strike is probably not going to really help you in terms of injury prevention. Whereas, you know, if you're always getting knee problems or you're always getting shin splints, then perhaps changing to that more, it's hard to say more efficient stride, but certainly a more, on paper, a more efficient stride in more terms classical. Of landing. Mm-hmm. Landing underneath yourself with a higher cadence. So, you know, I've run running form workshops, and we always would look at the elites on the track and look at their form and their cadence and what they were doing. And, you know, what was so remarkable was just the uniformity of the position of their legs and, you know, the cadence, all of, you know, there's so many of them, even though they might have different, they had different idiosyncrasies in terms of maybe, you know, how upright their body was, or whether their heads bobbed around, or whether they had a tight arm bend or a more open bend at the arm. But that kind of movement of the legs was so uniform amongst all the elite runners. So you're like, okay, so if there is a textbook version of perfection, this is probably it. But does that mean everybody needs to achieve that in order to run to the best of their ability? And I think I'm less convinced that's true now than I was a few years ago, because in my experience, a lot of people really just aren't able to change their form. They really try, And the interesting thing is often they think that they have, they're like, oh yeah, it's so much better now. I'm not landing out on a straight leg. But when you film them and you slow it right down, actually not very much has changed, but they feel that a lot has changed. And
yeah, but
I
if
think
they,
that's
if they
because
feel that a lot's changed, you shouldn't be videoing them and tell them that it hasn't, because mentally they're psyched to go faster.
yeah, no, that's actually really true. And
You should be just looking at them and going, yeah, you're much better now.
yeah, well, the first part of the workshop would always be just to video them. And I actually think just that in itself is a really useful thing to do, even without then going, and now we're going to make you do X, Y, and Z. Now let's video you again and see if it's changed. I mean, it's not that easy to fix running form. You can't just fix it in the course of an afternoon. But just seeing what you do when you run, just seeing yourself is so useful. And to get a friend to video you and watch it, even that's really worth doing.
Yeah, we've done a little bit of that, and it's quite revealing.
It is, isn't it? Yeah.
You don't have to get sophisticated.
That's
especially,
right. That's right.
If I could just add a little bit for old people, because I am one, that what I've been doing with respect to running form is not so much trying to improve my running form, is to stop my running form from getting worse and worse as I get older. So things like running
really
tall.
Good,
I've spent the last year, my mantra is run tall, run tall. And that's not so that I can get my fascia flexing better for me, but that it just doesn't degenerate as I get older as much as it would otherwise, because you sort of naturally sort of curve over.
And stride length really does shorten with age as well. And I think that is to do with it's to do with flexibility and collagen content of muscles and that kind of thing. But I think that doing drills and mobility stuff is really important for kind of stopping the rot, we'll say.
Or at least slowing it down a bit.
And then what about stretching? So, we used to hear like not to do any static stretching before you run, but in your book, you talk about like, well, you can, because the static stretching in the studies was actually for like, I don't know, 2 minutes or something.
Crazy. Yeah.
Some amount of time that nobody stretches for that amount of time anyway.
That's right. Yeah. It's really interesting looking at that research. I mean, I think it brought out a lot of things, that when you watch athletes, if you go to a meet and you watch athletes, you often see people doing stretching, don't you? And you think, oh, God, don't they know they shouldn't be doing stretching? And it's like, well, they probably know a lot more, don't they? Because they're on the front line going out there.
And they're Olympians because you're watching them on TV. Yeah.
Yeah. And we're sitting there watching them and saying, oh, they shouldn't be doing that. But we need to think about, what's happening in a laboratory setting and what's happening in a controlled experiment is not necessarily the same as what's happening in the real world. So when you look at these studies and you see, they held this hamstring stretch for 240 seconds. I mean, that is going to deactivate a muscle. That's going to tell a muscle we're relaxed now. We've done something and now we're just going to kind of relax and ease out. So that's not what you want to do to that muscle when you're just about to go for a run, of course. So that just highlighted that maybe there are a few flaws in the science, but it doesn't negate the truth in that if you are going to do some stretching, then you want to kind of reactivate and re-warm up again after you've done that. Now that's fine if you are this Olympic athlete, because you've got 2 hours before your race. So you might do, a little jog, and then you're going to go and do some static stretches and, but then you might follow them by some dynamic stretches, and then you might go for a run that's a little bit faster, and now you're ready to do your performance. But most of us sadly haven't got that sort of time to put into our preparation. And so the truth remains that you shouldn't just do static stretching when you have cold muscles at the start of a run. And so, if you've got time to do a bit of a run, warm up, and then do your static stretching because you really like doing that, and then you'll need to follow it with a little bit more movement-based, what they call dynamic stretching, or I like to call mobility. And then you need to get your heart rate back up again. So it's quite a long process. So I think in a very roundabout way, I kind of came back to the same decision that it's probably best for most of us not to do it. But I found a really interesting study that really harks back a little bit to what you just said about running form, actually, Alan, about the psychology of it. So they got people who were regular stretchers. They were like, oh, I always stretch before I run. And then they got people who didn't stretch, and they made the two kind of swap regimes. So one lot had to not stretch, even though they normally did, and the other ones vice versa. And then they monitored them over this period of time while they were doing that. And the injury rates were the same among both groups. So what it showed was the people who thought doing stretching prevented injuries and the people who thought not doing stretching prevented injuries, that neither, it was what you did normally was what worked for you. So, you've habitualized your body to always doing something. And if you stop doing that, then you might get injuries. And if you start doing something that you've never done before, that you might get injuries. And so in some ways, it's like, just carry on, everyone, carry on doing what you were doing.
If it floats your boat, off you go.
Yeah, and here we are. We want like something scientific that will tell us like how we need to train and what we need to do. But then it seems like it always comes around full circle back to like, well, it might work for you or it might not. You have to try it first.
Something that I read through your book, and most of the chapters, they're sort of logical, and you read some stuff that you've maybe seen a bit about before, or you get a bit more in depth. But something that I read where I went, oh, wow, I've never seen that before, and I'm totally amazed, was when I read in your book that there was a study where they give 44 healthy runners MRI scans, and they found like all of their knee meniscuses had some damage in them. Like if you're coming to have an MRI scan, basically if you're a runner, they're going to find something. It's got nothing to do with whether you're injured or not.
Yeah, it's not quite as simple as that. I think that the point I was trying to make with that study is that pain and damage are not the same thing.
Okay.
And so I think that when people get injuries, they often think that if they get this opportunity to look inside the body through having an MRI scan, that they will find this magic solution, and then the person will fix them. The person will be able to fix them because they've seen inside and they've seen what's wrong, and now they can fix it. And it just isn't that simple. And so that study illustrated that lots of people, what I'm saying really is that even if you've got pain, it doesn't mean that you've got damage. Pain is created in the brain and sent. It's not, people think it's, I always get afferent and efferent pathways mixed up, so I won't use those words. But basically, it's not the body that's injured sending a message to the brain saying, I'm injured. It's the other way around. It's the brain telling that part of the body that it's injured or that it needs to be protected. So pain originates in the brain. It's a really amazing area of study and research. It's really fascinating. And so, even they've looked at the words that physios use. If you go along and someone says, that tendon's really worn away, or, oh, well, it's just wear and tear, or you've really, you've pulled this, or all these words that are quite kind of violent and quite worrying really create more pain and more stress for people. And there is a school of thought within physiotherapy and other sort of rehabilitation that you just sort of say, oh, that's a bit unhappy at the moment, that muscle, we'll need to work on this, and actually just kind of really playing down those things. Because if I remember when I had this hamstring injury, and I literally I almost visualized it hanging on by about 2 or 3 threads still, and I just thought it was going to ping off at any time, because I'd been given this sort of imagery really by like, oh, you've really worn away where it attaches to the bone and this sort of thing. And, our bodies are pretty robust. And so I guess I was just trying to say, and it is a real study, but I wasn't trying to say, oh, look, all runners have got damage in their knees. It's just saying that you might have damage that shows up on a scan, but that doesn't necessarily mean that your body isn't functioning really well and that you've got absolutely no pain. And equally, somebody who's got really bad knee pain they might do a scan and there's nothing to see, nothing there. So where's that pain coming from? So it's just like, don't rely on scans because they don't tell you as much as you think they might do.
Okay.
Good insight. Anyway.
Yeah. So, another interesting fact, and this one is more about the immune system. So you talk about staying healthy, and there was an interesting bit of information about air travel being associated with a high risk of suppressing our immune system. So, and I think we experienced this, Alan, because we just recently went to a race that was away, and we flew there, and
we're all sick.
Even if we weren't sick, like when we left over there and came home, we all came home sick. And even if we had been sick and we were recovering, we got more sick, like Alan, when we got home. So, is your advice that runners should just stick to races that are closer to home, so that, if you have a really big goal, let's say you want to run your sub 3 hour marathon, in my case, should I just pick races that are not far away? Would that help? Or is there any other advice?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think if the flight is of a long enough distance, that's going to create some jet lag and that sort of thing. And I think that is actually a really good idea to try to avoid that. If you've got this dream race that is in a particular place. I mean, I don't fly to races anymore, but that's for environmental reasons. I wouldn't fly to a race. It's not really to do with performance. It's got other reasons. But in terms of just flying on a sort of a shorter haul flight, I mean, I would certainly recommend wearing a mask, because it's kind of okay to wear masks now, isn't it? It would look really weird 5 years ago if you suddenly turned up with a mask. But I think I would definitely wear a mask. And I think I mentioned in the book about taking probiotics. I might not have mentioned it in that specific context, but it's certainly in the nutrition chapter that England athletics, or British athletics, who work with our Olympic athletes, they recommend that athletes take probiotics during heavy periods of training, because it's been shown to help support the immune system. So that might be something that would be worth incorporating if you know that you've got travel coming up, that you can take probiotic supplements which help to sort of maintain good gut health and your microbiome, and then that in itself can help to support your immune system.
Sam, we should have had this conversation 3 weeks ago.
Oh,
should have booked this interview earlier.
Yeah.
Okay, so for next time, though, at least now we know. And luckily, the 2 marathons that we're registered for this year, they're all close to home. They're both close to home. Yeah, they're local, so we won't even need hotels for those. So
yeah, and that ties in with my thing about the low stress race morning as well. I think if you've flown and you're a bit tired, you've had to get from the airport, and then you've got to go to an expo to get your number, and you've got all this kind of hassle, and you're in an unfamiliar place. I think,
and you have to find food for the next morning, because oftentimes the hotel breakfast is not available at 5 a.m.
we don't,
or whatever.
Paris, welcome to Paris. It's like breakfast at that time.
Yeah, it's like, well, it starts at 9 a.m. and you're like, oh well, I'll be racing by then.
Exactly. Yeah.
If I'm going for a fast marathon, should I be following the race bunny if they have one?
The race bunny.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, the pacer.
Yeah.
I guess
I've never heard it called a race bunny, but I quite like that. It's nice.
We call them race bunnies over here, and sometimes they have little baseball caps with ears on them. It's great.
I've been a race bunny at the London Marathon.
And the ears have the time that they're pacing. The ears will have the time they're pacing written on them.
If you're a less beginnery person, you know about race bunnies.
Well, when I was a race bunny at the London Marathon, I had a kind of rucksack which had two poles coming out, or was it one? Maybe it was just one pole in the middle, and the flag with the time on the top.
Oh, cool.
And then at some point along the course, I needed to go to the loo, so I tried to open the portaloo. But of course, I couldn't get in because I had this massive big thing. So I was like, okay, I don't think I can go to the loo after all. But most of the time when you need the loo in a marathon, you just stop thinking about it and it goes away. So.
Oh, okay.
You had some advice in your book actually about not having to stop for a pee break during
Yes,
the
I
marathon.
did.
Mhm.
Yeah,
That's
that was
quite
a real,
important.
that's been a big breakthrough for me, actually, to not, I mean, I didn't always stop for wee stops in marathons, but it had happened to me a couple of times. And then reading that advice about stopping your drinking an hour before, because I drink quite a lot of water anyway. And so if I'm holding it, I'll just be sipping it, especially if I'm a bit kind of nervous, I'll be just drinking it just because I've got it. So to just say, no, you've had your last drink, then you can go to the loo, and you then, that whole sort of process is kind of done with, rather than just thinking, oh, I'll just join the back of the queue for the toilets again, even though I've just been, a lot of the time it is just a psychological need rather than a physical one.
That one piece of advice could be the difference between success and failure, in fact.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
It does add time.
Just conscious for our listeners, you never answered my question about race bunnies.
Should you follow the race
bunny?
bunny? If your training has shown that the time that you're going for is a realistic prospect, then I think it's a good idea. But if your training has suggested, let's say, that you're capable of 3:08, and are you going to follow the 3-hour person? I probably wouldn't, because I think just that fact that you're going to be starting, I'd rather kind of build up to the pace, know that I can kind of push towards the end, rather than start off with them and try and hang on, because psychologically that's going to be really hard if you start to drop off and you see them disappearing off into the distance. So for people who are really bad at pacing and really go off too fast all the time, I always sort of say it's a good idea to go with the pacer, who's maybe even a little bit of a slightly slower pace than your goal pace. If you can find you're trying to do sub 4 maybe, and you're always going off ridiculously fast, go with the 4:15 pacer and go with them up to, say, 10 miles, and then leave them behind, because you've got through that sort of danger area, and you're going to then feel a lot stronger as you go into the second half of the race.
Sounds great. Let's just, because I don't want to go over the time, but I do want to talk about carbo loading, because for the last few years, I've been doing like a 3-day carbo load, because that was kind of like the most recent information I had gotten. And it was something that like one of my friends was following, and she's a pretty good runner. And so it was like 10 grams per kilogram of body weight of carbs for 3 days leading up to the marathon. And I always find it super hard. And I don't even think I like get to that amount.
Yeah, it's really high, isn't it? That's really high.
It is. And so in your book, I was actually really happy that you said I only have to do it for 24 hours.
24 hours.
Yeah. So I don't know, maybe you can talk about that. Like, is that sort of the new recommendation, is 24 hours, or is that like something that you've just noticed that it works just as well as 3 days?
Yeah, I mean, no, yeah, that's right. That's what it is. It's not that it's better, it's just that it's just as good, and it's a lot easier. That's really the difference. That's what the science is showing, that there's no difference in the benefits that you get from doing it for 24 hours or doing it for 72 hours. So why, unless you enjoy doing it, but it's kind of,
I don't.
You do feel, I feel the same. You just feel quite heavy, because each gram of carbohydrate that you're storing, you store 3 grams of water with that. And so that's why you start to feel kind of really heavy and sluggish. Of course, all of that water will dissipate, that will all be sweated out and metabolized once you start running. But, I always remember one of the elites, I think it was Gabriel Selassie, I think. Oh, I can't remember who it was, but one of the East African athletes said, I think it's good to get to the start line just feeling slightly fat. Then you're going to like burn off all that stuff. Mind you, I don't think that any of them were.
Yeah, well, their definition of slightly fat is probably different to our
yeah,
definition.
It's all relative, isn't it?
Yeah.
But yeah, I get that though, feeling just slightly sort of heavy and not sort of, because the opposite would be true. Not great advice to give I'm not condoning this, but that going out to do a 5K, you almost want to be sort of slightly dehydrated, and you'll be the lightest you can be. If you're slightly dehydrated, you don't be running for that long. And I mean, I've seen stuff talked about, that people would try and do that to run faster, which you certainly wouldn't want to be doing on any longer distance races. But yeah, maybe not the most I don't know, health and safety focused advice to give there.
Everybody's different, and everybody has different challenges and different focuses that they need to do for a marathon improvement. Is there anything in particular that you found like, oh, this is quite useful, or particularly a common thing, or maybe a less known thing that is one or two pieces of advice that are not necessarily in front of everybody at this point in time?
I think maybe the a couple of useful things. I mean, maybe we've touched on them, but I think that I'm always amazed at the speed that people run their easy runs at. I just think, hang on a minute, but I'm much faster than you, and yet your easy run pace is faster than mine. How come you're going that fast for your easy run? So I think slowing down the easy runs and really trying to get that difference, that polarity between easy runs and hard runs. Because I think, Liz, like we were saying, that if you're good at racing, often it's because you've got used to pushing yourself very hard in training sessions. So you're good at pushing yourself. But if you do all your easy runs a little bit hard, you're kind of slightly tiring yourself on those easy runs. So when it comes to your harder runs, you don't actually push as hard as you should be able to. So you never really get the maximum training benefit out of those sessions, and therefore you never race quite as well as you could. And I think that those two things come together. I think the fact that I train very, I run easy, I train hard, and then I race hard. And I think that those things are, there is a link between those. It's not just a kind of a coincidence. So I think that's one thing.
We have a friend, just as an aside, but we have a friend, and we always say about him, he always tries to win the training.
Yeah. That's the ones who leave the race out on the road, isn't it?
Yeah.
Not kind of have enough left to finish it, or finish it to their best of their ability. And the other thing I think is probably encapsulated best in that chapter that is called All About You, which is really trying to bring yourself into this equation and not just see the marathon as something that's separate from you, that you're just going to sort of attack. And it's the same for everyone. It's very much going to be a personal journey. And so I think trying to bring in your own experiences or knowledge about yourself is going to really help, not just physiologically and physically, but also psychologically, which is a big part of the battle. And then everybody who's running a marathon, who's got the book, should make sure they read the Execute the Race chapter, how to actually race on race day. Because I think that's something I was really keen to put in here, which isn't always in books. It's like, it's all about the training, isn't it? But actually quite a lot can go wrong on the race day as well, if you haven't really thought that much about how you're going to approach it and stuff. So I think reading that and sort of thinking, really visualizing all of that is really, really helpful. It might even be something as silly as, if it's your first marathon, all your family might want to go with you. And so they all turn up, and your sister and her kids and your auntie Flo and all these people all come down to watch you. And then they all want to stand with you and chat to you at the start, and they're all asking you things. And you might be somebody who just needs to be on your own, and you want to go and, almost do some deep breathing, or you want to just go and sit on your own and focus, step into your circle of excellence, perhaps, but you're too polite to say, do you know what? I need you all to just bugger off and leave me alone. And so, so thinking about all of those kind of things, make sure this is about you and what you need on the day. And I think people can get a bit derailed by things like that. So I think it's good to really almost walk yourself through what that day is going to be like, even right up to the moment that the gun goes, and have a race plan, have a plan of what you're going to do once the gun does go.
That's great advice. And you mentioned people reading the book. So I think this is perfect timing to say, is there a preferred place that you want to direct readers to get a copy if they're interested?
Order it from your local bookshop if they don't have it. I think that's always really good advice to we have something called oh no, it's not called that, it's called bookshop.org, and it's a website. I don't know if it's international or not, but it's a website which you can buy the book from that website, but the money will go to your chosen bookshop. So it's good for people who want to buy online but don't want to necessarily.
So you can support your small corner bookstore.
That's right. And they might not have it in, or you might not necessarily have time to go and get it, or you might not live near a bookshop, but you can still say, oh, well, I want the money to go to this bookshop, and those bookshops sort of signed up to the scheme. So that's a really, really good one.
Oh, that's good. I will put a link in the show notes so that people can go.
And if people want to find out more about what you're up to and check out your other books, and
yeah, my website is alive and kicking. It's a little bit it's not out of date, but it's a little bit unloved. But
Dusty.
All the information about those books are there, and that's just at sam-murphy.co.uk. And I'm Sam Murphy Runs on Instagram and Twitter, which I'm a little bit more active on. So
that's great.
I've really enjoyed talking to you. It's been really fun.
It's been absolutely fantastic. All that remains for us to do is to just give our summary thoughts on the book. I think it's a very practical book. It doesn't dwell too long on any one subject, but it gives you, I think, some good practical advice on nearly all of different subjects, things that you can take and implement, and based on research and background, not just on hearsay or whatever. There's a training plan in there in the book for most people's time availabilities. If you've only got 1 day a week, then forget the marathon. I think 3 to 4 days is what you're going to need, but right the way up to much bigger time inputs, and also different experience levels. So if you're inexperienced and you know what you're about versus you're not too sure what you're about, there are plans for everyone in there. I think basically, if you read the book, if you're a marathon runner, if you read the book and you just pick a few things out of it, like a smorgasbord or a buffet table, then you have a great chance to improve, and certainly you'll improve to some extent. And maybe I think you'll improve significantly, because you might you might just find the thread, the one golden nugget that you personally need to take your marathon experience forward.
I guess I'll just add that it is a training book. So all of those people that love training books, which we know that runners, there's a lot of us that enjoy these kinds of books, but it's not just focused on the training plans and paces that you should run. And this book, I think the real value that you'll get out of it is really everything else. I mean, and like there are a bunch of things we didn't touch on. There's a chapter about nutrition, well, a whole section about nutrition, about ergogenic aids, things like that. So you can read about the practical ones, and then hopefully on social media weed out the information that maybe like you shouldn't focus on so much, because the book, it's very well researched. Sam definitely summarizes the science and then tells us how we can use it. So, for example, when she talks about neuro-linguistic programming and how it has been proven to help people dealing with raised day fears and anxiety, she then provides a description of the circle of excellence exercise, which is something that we can actually use and implement. So that's really the strength of this book. Is I find that there are a lot of great tips in it. I like the, we didn't even talk about this, there are sample strength and mobility routines that Sam included. And I appreciated the mention of safety when running in the dark, which is important for most of us who are running either before or after finishing our work days. And I'll just leave runners by saying that Sam provided in her book this quote, and I find that it sums up the marathon experience really well. She wrote, and this was not her quote, it was like a quote she incorporated in the book, but that she got somewhere else. A marathon is hundreds of miles. The last 26.2 miles is the finish. And that's your race. We're all nervous at the starting line, but we've basically already done the hard part, which is the consistent training prior to race day.
So once again, thanks, Sam. Thanks for spending time to contact us from over the Atlantic Ocean.
I love the quote that Kipchoge said, which I've got at the last bit of the conclusion, where he says, with a strong heart and a good mind, you can do it. I think that's so nice as well. It's just,
that's great. Yeah, that's a good one too.
Wow. I wish you all the best with continued success with the podcast. I think it's a really good idea. And I look forward to downloading some episodes and having a listen.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Running Book Reviews. Big thank you to the publisher Bloomsbury for providing review copies of the book, and to Sam Murphy for spending time with us today. If you'd like to leave us feedback about how we can improve the podcast, or want to suggest a book that you would like us to review in a future episode, please leave us a comment on social media. We are Running Book Reviews on Facebook and Instagram, and on Twitter, we are reviews_running. Please also follow us on social media to find out about new episodes when they're released, or you can just subscribe to the podcast on your favorite streaming platform. If you've been listening for a while and are wondering how you can help us out, there are a few ways. If you enjoy the podcast, spread the word, tell your friends about us, or share a link to your favorite episode with a running partner. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts if this is how you listen to your podcast, or you can rate us on Spotify out of 5 stars. We are also on Buy Me a Coffee, which is what Alan mentioned earlier, and you can buy us a coffee, but it's not mandatory. You can just sign up to follow us. If you put in your email address, you'll get notified if we put out any extra little pieces of audio from interviews that was not included in the podcast episode, or articles or anything else that we decide to post. So that's it for today. Bye for now.
Bye.